Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of Hermitcraft. Oh yeah, I've got a crown. You know, a crown from Mumbo's game. I got this during a live stream. Let's roll that footage. Right, I want to do a little something. We've been in the area for a while. Oh, time! Time! It's time. Let's get a reward. Hey, diamonds and a crown. I get to wear a crown. Woo! I got the first level. It's still making noises. Did I break it? It only went down by what? It's stuck in a loop. What have I done? I'm going to slowly back away. Maybe I should send Mumbo a message. I think I broke your machine. It wasn't me. Apparently that's normal. Oh, okay. I did not know it at the time, but this thing powers down. The redstone lamps were slowly ticking down, and I just wasn't being very observant, basically. Well, that was a distraction from my introduction. I wanted to show you the entrance to the Evil X boss fight. Yes, it's very dark and probably difficult to see what's going on here on YouTube. It's a bunch of floating candles and some snaky red nether bricks going up and down around here. And with that, I can say that the Evil X boss battle is actually finished. I've made my final round of adjustments to this battle, which I'm going to come back to later on as it's much tougher to beat now. I've also gone and updated this book. And I know that some of you will want to read absolutely every page. So as I flick through, you have the opportunity to pause the video on each of these pages if you really want to read every little bit of my explanation for the other hermits. Yeah, I've put a lot of effort into finishing up this project. I've also put in a system to track how many wins and losses there are, so we can come back here over time and see how people are doing against Evil X. By the way, the feedback was really wonderful as well. Thank you so much for all of your kind comments and encouragement. I love that project. It was really good to see people enjoy it as much as I did. And now we are wandering through here because I've made some transitions between each of the different areas. Some of these were pretty tricky to figure out. Anyway, it's just the finishing touches that I put on the Rainbow Road. That's what I'm going to call it, but it's the Rainbow Tunnel. Yes, it's another small thing that's been taken care of recently, but I haven't actually been playing on the Hermitcraft server that much. I have been distracted by something extremely positive. I've had to put my mind and all of my energy into one sole focus these last few days. Over the past 6 months, I've kept my lips sealed. I've been working on a project so dear to my heart that I've wanted to talk about it just about every day. However, I wanted it to be a surprise. I have released an album. This album is very special to me as it's the one I was writing before I got distracted by YouTube and making Minecraft videos. I put so much of my soul, my passion into this project, and this year I decided to make it a reality. And so I've spent the last few days just engrossed in the process of getting this album out to all of you. And I've probably put the album art and something on the screen. You can get it on most major streaming services, including Spotify. You can buy the record on Bandcamp. You can go on YouTube and find it there as well. It's pretty much in most places you can listen to music. Basically, it's free for you to enjoy, and I just wanted to put it out there into the world. I didn't want to be the only person who ever got to hear this music. And fair warning, if you watch my videos on a regular basis, you're probably going to see me plug this record quite a lot. For me, this is probably the most meaningful thing that I've done with my time here on this planet, so be warned, I'm gonna keep reminding you that it's finally out there in the world for people to listen to. Okay, so the project for today's episode is to modify this thing, known as David Copperfield, David the Fifth, which we built with Pixel Riffs. This is his design when he came onto the server over 6 months ago now. So in this episode, we're going to get into the weeds of the redstone, so I'm not going to really recap how this thing works from that perspective, but there is another perspective that is going to be useful here. You're seeing me finish using the machine by picking up the aged copper blocks. This is a copper aging facility if you did not know. You place down all of your regular copper blocks like this on top of the magenta terracotta, press the button, and the flying machine is going to store these in little aging modules where it will be able to detect when it's fully aged, and then the flying machine brings them back out again, which is why we have loads of these flying machines sitting around, because we've had tons of aged copper come out of this thing. So our project for this episode is to modify this crazy setup so that it produces all 4 different stages of copper aging. And there's Pixel right there. So the reason that we just produced the final age is because it's really convenient just to right click and strip it right all the way back down. It can't age any further, so that makes a lot of sense. However, this also means for the player that if they want to use those intermediary blocks, they have to do like a lot of right clicking and then using honeycomb, of course. You can actually use this on the final stage as well, which seems a little bit pointless, but if you want to preserve a stage, then you of course have to first of all strip it down, then right click on it. And if you're trying to do this with a lot of blocks when you're building, that can be a complete and utter pain. So just imagine that the facility here, instead of having just this one, could have all the different stages of aging. And we can do this with redstone, and yes, it'll involve automatically dispensing honeycomb onto these blocks. Because lest you forget, this is how it works. If I put a dispenser over there and there's honeycomb inside, and then we power it and bam, you see it right there, it's had honey put onto it. So let's go and grab that. I'm using vanilla tweaks, so it puts a highlight around these when they're in your inventory and they've been waxed. So I thought this was going to be really simple. You see there's this event that happens when your block is fully aged. That redstone, it will get powered. So if we have an observer there and then we have a dispenser here, it's really straightforward. But my testing showed me that no, this isn't going to work because it actually lags behind the block being pushed out. But also there's a redstone torch there. So when a block gets pushed in, it powers the dispenser, and that's not what we want. This leaves one other place where the dispenser can go, and that is facing downwards like this. When the blocks get pushed along by the machine, the slime block is here, so we don't really have to worry about it, but this is like the one spot. It will effectively be like here facing downwards onto these copper blocks as they come across. So I tried to do a bunch of stuff with like chaining hoppers from this redstone here and from other events that take place to power this dispenser, but the problem was they would sometimes, power twice. So once that had been figured out, we needed to bring this signal up and go into that dispenser. And if you know much about placing observers, this quickly gets rather tricky, as now we need the next one to like face across that way. And then now you're powering out here and you want it to point into there. It's basically really awkward just to get it to this dispenser. So after a lot of shim-shamming with redstone wires, I finally found the perfect event, which is this thing right here. Remember, this actually like moves the copper block into the correct position. So if we have this here and here, we can then put a block. It doesn't have to be a target block. I just use that and I like this block. But when the copper comes in, this is going to get pulled back. So the observer here, it just sort of powers the air next to this piston without powering it, and it doesn't power this dispenser, which is really important because a lot of times the redstone events happen twice. You only want to power this thing at the end. So it's when it gets pulled back in like this that it actually pushes the aged copper block out into this space, and then, of course, this target block gets powered. The dispenser can push the honey into the block down below. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast here because it's going to be like a lot of explaining and then a lot of building, because on top of this dispenser, we can put a hopper here without it being interfered by redstone. And this is great because we're going to need to keep all of that honeycomb topped up. So we can create like a distribution system with either hoppers or minecarts and rails, something like that. Okay, the last component of this contraption is right here, these droppers, and each one of these essentially represents a stage of aging. They will get moved into the dropper down below as those aging events are detected. And then there's some signal strength comparison, so only when there's 4 of those down here will this redstone turn on. And that's done with this furnace. It's got like a non-stackable and 5 items, which actually makes it a little confusing. So I'm going to swap those out for droppers, and we're going to use some non-stackable items that I have to hand here. Okay, so this one has 3 items in it, and we want to detect when this one has 4. That's how the machine currently works. So this doesn't turn on until we put in that final one, and then the comparator turns on. Now, do you see where this is going? Because this can easily be configured for less. So let's go and reduce this down to 2. And then again, we put 1 more in to go to the 3rd stage of copper aging, and the redstone turns on. Okay, so now we have just one over here, and when we put in 2, it turns on. So, modification number 1 is this. When the copper gets pushed out, the dispenser is going to put honeycomb onto it. And modification number 2 is changing the contents of the dropper and the furnace, which we'll replace with a dropper or a dispenser or some other container, because then we're telling them how many stages of aging we want to measure. Here is an important detail, by the way. You might be wondering, how do these items get back into the top? Well, there is a reset mechanism. It's for when the copper blocks come all the way back across. You can see there is an observer here that's going to power some redstone down below, and then that picks it up and powers this thing over and over again. Now, that is compatible with modifying the setup here for less items inside of those droppers, and it doesn't create another event up here with the dispenser, so we are good to go. So we nailed the concept, but there's one thing that I think I might be lacking for a proper test, and that is honeycomb. So we need to construct a mighty bee battery farm, something on a grand scale. So over here in this temporary little space for temporary farms, I've been breeding up some bees. It kind of doesn't look like there's a lot of them, but they ended up like clustering into these corners, and then they stopped moving around as well. So here we can see by looking at the lines, there's quite a few there. Not as many over here. I think they might have been dying from entity cramming. If I hold the flowers here, notice how like they don't move towards them anymore. In the beginning though, they were happily moving. I can still breed them and all that kind of stuff, right? But I don't know, their behavior's just completely locked out. And now we got some movement and... did you see that? It went back and forth and then it died, yeah. There's entity cramming stuff going on here. Oh, as soon as I break a block, they start moving around, and then some of them took damage. Yikes. Oh, they're moving even faster now. What is this thing that I've created? Oh boy. Sometimes when you hit record, you realize, geez, it's been a while since I last did this, and now I'm Xisuma again. Remember season 7? Such a gorgeous little skin. I threw it on for the occasion because I was going to be grinding all of this bee breeding, and that design that I had did not work out. I had to go and open up the area and just do something simple and straightforward. I've been doing a ton of breeding. I'm actually a little surprised to see all the bees are inside the beehives at the moment. I had their numbers up really high, but I've just been putting tons of these beehives in, more than a stack, which is what we actually need for this. And I've also installed a mod just to help me with this, okay? Look at that. Wait, that one's got 2 in? Yeah, to figure out which ones actually have 3 in, I just decided to use a mod for this particular operation. And so over here I've got a bunch where it doesn't have the right amount of bees and adults, so I probably still need to do a whole bunch of breeding, but I've been going in here and doing that in between ripping out these things. So because of the trapdoors on the front, the bees can only go in, but they can't come out. So when I pick up this, now I can check. That's a perfect beehive. And as I mentioned, we need 64 of them, so these are all perfect, and then these right here, with a few extra just in case I make a mistake. We are now ready to head to the end dimension, where I've already been, and died as a result of making a terrible, terrible decision, which was to build a platform in the void of the end dimension. Off in that direction we have our copper farm, so in the opposite direction we're going to build a bee farm, and the platform of this was built out of black stained glass. You can probably imagine how difficult this was to locate until I added some blocks on the corners. Like, it took me a long time to get back here and actually land on this thing successfully, which we can now do thanks to the markers. Anyway, it's now bee farm building time. I'm just gonna put this whole thing together. And so much time has passed by, and I have constructed an almighty bee farm made of 64 bees nests, and it's not too much to look at, but it's kind of cool. It looks a lot more impressive when you view this thing from the outside, especially the fact that it's just sort of hanging here over the void. It's kind of terrifying. And if you recognize the design, this is the one that we built in Season 8. The big difference here, though, is that it's not tiled side by side. I've actually spaced them out a little bit. And you might be thinking, why have we done this in the end dimension? Because there is no day-night cycle over here, so the bees can pollinate and do their thing constantly. But you'll notice at the moment, that absolutely none of them are out. Yes, this gave me quite the heart attack when I finished building this thing because none of the bees were doing their thing. But as you'll see over here, it does indeed work. However, for the last couple of hours of AFKing, I failed to get any more drops. This, my friends, is because the server restarted. So there does appear to be a bug that stops bees going in and out of their nests when in the end dimension, but the solution is to restart the server. And since no one else is online, I'm going to do that right now. Let's see what happens when I log back in. Look at that, the bees have popped out again. Not all of them, but they've come back out. Now before we leave, the last thing to comment on is the storage here. You might have expected me to build a compact shulker box loader, but I just kind of thought, I keep building these things over and over again, and this is quite a simple operation, so it's pretty straightforward. When I return here, all of these boxes are likely to be empty, so when I arrive, I just place them and refill them. So that's it, job done. We've got 10 boxes of honeycomb to use in our modified copper farm. Is it a copper farm or is it a copper aging facility? I'm sure you knew exactly what I meant, and let me show you some of the modifications over on this side. Lots and lots of hoppers and dispensers, way more than I thought I was actually going to need. So you'll notice that the blocks that I've used that used to be the target blocks are aged copper blocks. We've got 2 rows for the 3rd stage and 2 rows for the 2nd stage. So when you load it up, there's sort of like a visual clue as to what age you're going to get back. And I sort of planned this thing having 3 sections, but of course the first age is the block that we put in by default, so we don't need that. We only need 2 aging sections. Then on the opposite side here, you'll see there's way more blocks because I put in the rail system. It's going to start over here and it's going to go down to the end, wrap around the back of the flying machine, come up here, and then go across into the next one. And it will do that all the way until it reaches the end here, and then it will go all the way back. And now that I think about it, I could actually have this thing stretch over to the other side and then do all the zigzagging over there, and it would end up back at the start. But with so much time put into this project, I was getting this nagging feeling like there's going to be something that I've overlooked, so I decided to stop here and get it ready for a test. There was also the issue of managing the flow of items, which luckily I figured out. Initially I thought this was going to be rather complex. We would have a minecart over here full of honeycomb, and we would need a way for these containers that dispense the honeycomb to communicate if they're full or empty to this thing. But here's the deal, every time we activate this farm, we know that we need 1 piece of honeycomb before it comes back. And this thing making a trip all the way across and all the way back is probably going to dispense like at least 2 into each of these dispensers. And if this thing was full to the brim already with honeycomb, there would be no worries about it running out, so it would make its journey to the end and come all the way back, and these things would have more than they needed. And I think the redstone that we need is actually this stuff down here. It's technically for when the flying machine comes back, but that's fine because we can just restock it after it's done aging it. So these lines of redstone down here are going to need like an additional line. So if any of them gets a signal coming through, it'll send something all the way over here to this minecart. And of course, this thing is going to be sitting around for ages in between with hoppers pointing into it, loading it full of that honeycomb. For now though, we want to make sure it's actually full up and that there's honeycomb in the system. Like I said, we're going to do a test, so this thing will make its way around. Let's see how many it puts into each dispenser. Oh, just 1. Interesting. I thought it would have picked up 2. Yeah, one of the reasons that I've spaced out the powered rails, even though we have lots of gold, is so that it would go over these slower. I hope that meant that there'd be 2 going in there, but it seems that it's just 1. Anyway, when it gets back, we'll be ready for a test, and it then will have 2, which is more than enough, and every time it gets sent out again, it will always be putting in more than it needs. The thing I haven't done yet, though, is configure the droppers down here. If you happen to need to know, for 2 shovels on the side, it's 1 and 19 items. And for 3 shovels on the side, it's simply 2. Now with all of that set up and good to go, imagine the shock and terror when the flying machines entered this area here and locked up, which they're not going to do now because I've fixed the problem. But yeah, this thing made a few moves in and then all of a sudden it stopped. This is because of something I probably should have caught. It's the powered rails up top. You'll notice now that I've gone around and depowered all of them. So the one oversight was just that the piston here on the side would get bud powered if this block is directly powered. So the solution is to just move the powered block up to the side. And I loved how flat everything was here. And now we're going to end up with like this one ugly block on the side. It, for example, would go here and then that would happen over and over again. So I'm not going to rush into doing that in case I can brainstorm a solution that means we get to keep like how the aesthetic here is in this area. And now it's just a waiting game. I've been grinding and grinding to set everything up, and this thing so far has worked exactly how it's supposed to. So that's brilliant, and I'm pretty confident actually that all of them are. So I've been AFKing, and before we find out the results of that, we need to pop back over to Evil X so I can let you know about the modifications I talked about at the beginning. I have indeed made this thing much harder. Let's see, you can now only put out 3 hermits at once. This used to be a full board of 5, it's now got 3. Evil X's health is actually going to be 300 and ignoring the 280 on the card. Double damage is no longer a flip a coin thing, it will actually just double the amount of damage dealt before. And Evil X now heals for 150 hit points. And I've got to give a huge shout out to Cubfan, who really embraced this thing and came over here and played a bunch of games against Evil X, gave me a lot of feedback, which is why I've made the changes that I had. And he posted that video on his second channel. So if you wanted to see someone take on the Evil X boss battle, you've seen Vintage Beef take it on. If you want to see Cubfan do that, you'll have to go looking for his second channel. And as for me, I need to wrap this one up because it's been such a grind, especially dying in the middle of recording this episode. Ooh, it's been a grindy one. But it's been totally worth it because the result of all of that hard work is a resounding success. Look at this. It worked. It absolutely worked. I'm going to load it up and use it again. And let me not forget, I also figured out a solution for our problem with the bud powering. So this here can be a power source, but it can't directly power that block, which that won't do. And then we can just put a bit of redstone on top of it, and it powers the rail. So as I mentioned, it's been a grindy one for me, and I've got to grind out some changes on this side, and then do it all again over on the opposite side. But it's totally going to be worth it. I plan on doing that on a live stream, probably the day after this episode comes out on Thursday. So if all goes to plan, I'll be streaming over there on Twitch, and then at the beginning of the next episode, I'll be showing off the finished product. It's actually quite often that I do this with my episodes, right? It's because I grind, and then I get exhausted, and I'm like, I want to put the episode out, because most of the stuff is done. Oh, and don't forget to go and check out my music as well. Of course, it'll be linked in the description box down below. So, I guess that's it from me this episode of Hermitcraft. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like the project we got down here. We have upgraded David and given it a new dimension. It can now produce all types of copper. Pretty fantastic, right? Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.